Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's episode of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys joining me for today's video. We're going to be talking about how to determine the size of lure that you want to use. Now, lures come in all different sizes. Bass fishing lures, anything from an inch or an inch and a half long up to 12 inches long. And there's some things that you can really file away in terms of deciding what size of lure is going to work the best to catch a sort of a balance between the number of bites you get and the size of fish you get, because a lot of times it's just about the time of year. There's certain times of the year that the majority of the bass prefer smaller or bigger lures. So we're going to get into that in today's video and give you guys some good juice on that. Guys, one of the things about this thing, I really love just sitting down in a chair and talking to you guys about bass fishing on Advanced Bass Fishing, because a lot of people say, oh, Randy, you need to get out on the water and do some on the water videos showing stuff. But if you're serious about catching bass and you want to get better, the educational aspect of fishing it's much better done in sort of a classroom setting like this, sort of like going to school to figure out more how to catch more fish. So hope you guys are getting a lot out of it in these type of video settings. Also, guys, before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping tips. I just wanted to remind everybody about the spring sale going on at Tackle Warehouse now. They got 25% off on a bunch of stuff on the whole website. If you guys are looking to get some gear for spring, now's a really good time to do it. I'll put my Tackle Warehouse link in the description. If you guys could use that link, it's a good way to support the channel. And also, anyone interested in booking an on-the-water lesson with me, you can do that by going to my Facebook page, Randy Blaukat Professional Angler, and just shoot me a private message. So thanks for putting up with the plugs there. Okay, how do you determine the size of lure? Through my own experience about bass fishing for as long as I've been bass fishing, I have seen a distinct correlation between the time of the year and the size of the lure that you're using. So I sort of want to go through each season and sort of walk you through a little bit about how the size of the lure is going to make you more efficient. So first of all, one of the things you got to understand, it's like any time that you go larger on a lure, the number of strikes that you're going to get are probably going to be reduced. Larger the lure, there's something about the size on it. Overall, the bigger the fish, you sacrifice the number of bites you get for the quality, and vice versa. The smaller lures that you use, you might catch a good one occasionally, but it's more about numbers. But that's not really the way you want to look at it a lot of times in seasonally determining the best size of lure, because from what I have seen in my own fishing, you have a lot of variables involved, like water temperature and water clarity and the length of the daylight hours determine the size of the bait or the size of the lure that the fish are going to strike better. And I don't really understand the mechanisms behind this. It probably has something to do with like the size of the forage base in the lake, size of the crawdads, size of the shads, size of the perch at different times of the year. That's probably the best indicator with that. But one of the things about that, let's start out in the winter time of the year, and then we'll move up all the way through the year. One of the things you're going to find out about in the winter time is when that water temperature is cold, when it's in the 40s. Usually anywhere between December into early March, something like that. Bass prefer smaller lures. And when I'm talking about smaller lures, I'm talking about, the small swim baits, like the, 3-inch swim baits, 2.5 to 3-inch swim baits, small jerk baits, like more of a finesse type of a jerk bait. Like, I use that Megabass X Nanahan 75 a lot. Smaller spoons, like a 1/4-ounce spoon, little ice jigs, just downsized presentations. Even with an Alabama rig, the little swim baits on there, there's something about the cold water in correlation with the size of the bait fish and everything that are the primary forage and the metabolism of the fish. They just prefer smaller lures. You get a lot more bites with smaller lures. Now, this begins to change a little bit as you get into really about the first part of March, as usually starts changing a little bit. Once that water temperature starts knocking on 50 degrees, and you start, or it does, depending upon what part of the country you're in, once that water temperature starts getting about 5 degrees above its bottomed out temperature. So let's say, for example, where you fish, if the water temperature, the lowest it gets is 44, 45 degrees, once that water temperature starts reaching 49, 50, 51 degrees, you're going to see a big shift in the preference of a bass, and they're going to start wanting larger lures. Now, from my experience, is the bass want the largest lures of the entire year, for the most part, when the water temperature is in the 50s. When the water temperature is in the 50s, that's when you have more female bass up shallow, and staging for pre-spawn activities, and they'll go after bigger baits. Your larger full-size jigs, the big, like the 3-inch long square bills, big spinner baits like 3/4, 1 ounce spinner baits, big full-size chatterbait, just those larger baits like that. They really, really like them that time of year, and this is the time that you want to capitalize on that. Now, as it gets a little bit later, say for example, the water temperatures start to get in the 60s during the spawn and during the early pre-spawn, this is another time of year where they go back down to smaller presentations. And one of the things I found when those fish are starting to really focus on spawning, not necessarily being on a bed, but when they're really, really close to spawning, like they're in the process of looking for places to build nests, or they're building nests, or they're spawning, or they're garden fry after spawning, they go back and they want a little bit smaller lures. So that's when I'll go down to like a little wacky rig, like a little Cinco on a wacky rig, a shaky head, something like that. Pitching and flipping, downsized soft plastics, like like a little bitty, 3-inch, beaver type bait, like that Zoom Z-Hog Junior. Smaller jigs, tubes, just anything a little bit smaller when they're in and around that zone there. Now, after they're done spawning and you start to get in the post-spawn period a little bit more, that's when it's sort of like there's a diversity of stuff that picks up. From about when that water temperature hits about 70 degrees up until you start getting into, say, the first part of June or so, there's a lot of different sizes of lures that can work. You can catch some fish on like a big swim bait or a glide bait, like a 7 or 8-inch glide bait after the spawn, or like a 6 or 7-inch swim bait like that Megabass Bag Draft. And you can also catch fish finessing around. You can catch them on a little 1/4 ounce spinner bait, that are after the shad spawn. But the point is during the post spawn, before those fish get into like a summer pattern, they hit a lot of different sizes of bait. So it's not necessarily they prefer one or the other after that. Now, the next change that takes place is once you start getting into just the straight summer period. Now, this is usually starting around first or second week of June. That's usually when that takes place down there. I got a heater in my garage here that doesn't work half the time. It's like 14 degrees outside now. It's not working. It's freezing in here. But when you start to get in the summertime of the year, that's when you're going to start noticing a trend for these fish wanting to go for a little bit bigger lures. So when that water temperature starts to hit like the low to mid 70s or mid 70s, like in June, that's when I'm going to my bigger baits, like a big crankbait, like a big deep diving crankbait can work good. As the summer progresses, the big worms, like a 10 or 12-inch worm, is a really, really good way to catch them. Sometimes if I'm flipping and pitching, I'll go to a full-size jig, flipping and pitching in around shallow water cover. Big topwaters, like a big buzzbait, a big walking topwater, those can be really good. But during the summertime of the year, it just seems like they like that larger lure, that bigger prey. And probably my number one lure in the summertime of the year is, well, it's actually probably two. There's probably two that stand alone there. One is a big worm, like a 10 or 12-inch worm. I like that Zoom Old Monster Magnum, which is 12 inches, or a big crankbait, like I said, like the DD22, something along those lines. Now, as you get into the fall time of the year, really it starts in about late summer and fall, September, October, November. That period when that water temperature first starts to cool down, which is usually like September, they go back to wanting smaller lures, especially something like a small crankbait. If you're fishing where, it's the dog days of summer towards the end, it's starting to get close to the September, little bitty shad pattern crankbait, like a little 1.5-inch long shad pattern, can be really, really good that time of year. Small spinnerbait can be good, a small buzz bait, but it seems like to me, late summer, early fall, they go back to that trend of wanting a small bait, And then it changes again once you start to get into mid to late fall, and those bass start to prefer larger lures again. So when that water temperature starts dropping down into the 50s again in the fall time of the year, just like it was in the spring, that's when I'll go back to like my big glide baits, my big swim baits, maybe a big spinner bait, a full-size jig, a big square bill crankbait, like a big 3-inch square bill crankbait. It just seems like there's that natural cycle. It's like winter small, pre-spawn big, spawn small, post-spawn whatever, summer big, early fall small, and then back again for later in the year. So that's just that's been my experience, guys. If that has been what I have seen in bass fishing as far as the preference on the size. Now, obviously that's not set in stone, but I fished enough seasons to see like some type of reproducible results that I get by going to lures like that. So anyway, hope it helps you guys out. We'll talk later.